Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your best BC politics podcast with all the latest news and analysis from around the wacky world of BC politics. There is so much to cover. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, from the Check News Studios here in Victoria. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to start off that you are subscribed to the podcast. There's a much longer audio version of the show. Get it on Stitcher, Apple Pod, Google Podface, whatever you need to use to get it. But we do have extra content for you on the show after the video version, which you might be watching on YouTube, is over. So I want to introduce the panel really quick and then get right into another busy week of BC politics. The legislature's in session. There is the pandemic, which just continues to just dominate the entire news cycle. But there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to go around the boxes here. Maclean K, editor of the Orca.ca. Thanks for being here, Maclean.
Thanks for letting me join you on the Podface.
The Podface. Look, you've tried the rest. Now try getting the podcast directly to your face. America's 37th most popular podcast format. Jillian Oliver, Green strategist and campaigner for the Greens in all of their successful campaigns. Not the ones they lost, just the successful ones. Jillian, thanks for being here.
That's right. Thanks for having me.
Katy Merrifield, Vice President at Wellington Advocacy and Liberal strategist who's worked in BC and Alberta in the Premier's offices. Katy, thanks for being here.
BC Liberal, happy to be here.
BC Liberal, right. Not, I guess nowadays you got to make that distinction because federally...
I'm sure the federal Liberals would love to hear that I'm spinning for them.
Right, okay, right. We have a lot to get to here, including, I want to start with the story that has dominated the entire week, basically, in BC politics, which is the launch of vaccination call centers that everyone was looking forward to on Monday, getting to dial in to get your 90-year-old grandparents or family members, or if you're an Indigenous resident, 65 years and older, getting your vaccination appointment locked in, ready to go to get your COVID vaccine. Much like trying to order, Loverboy tickets on Ticketmaster, the demand for the precious commodity brought the whole system down. And no surprise on Monday, poof, the call-in centers did not work well. There was a villain that emerged from this story by the name of Telus. And we're going to go around the table and just talk a bit about the launch and collapse of these centers. Should we have seen it coming? What do we make of how it rolled out? It was a week of up and downs. Jillian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I think, the biggest thing, obviously, is that it's a bit strange that the Fraser Valley Health Authority has a online booking system and the rest of the province doesn't. And that raised a lot of questions and frustrations for people. The government said that they have an online booking system coming, but it's not ready. It's going to be ready sometime in April. But they also didn't have a backup plan. And I think that there's a lot of legitimate questions as to what is in that Telus contract. And, if they had mandated that and, since they didn't have the booking system ready, what was the fail-safe?
It's wild. There was a lot of questions about that online booking system. No real answers from government on why didn't we have that in place for all the health authorities, other than Adrian Dix's reply. I think that maybe, it's up to the individual health authorities to do that, which is crazy in a pandemic at this point, that just leave it up to them to decide to do it or not. But Maclean, what did you make of it?
Well, I mean, you kind of stole my talking point.
Okay,
there,
Katy, we're moving on to you now.
No, it defies explanation why there wouldn't be, a common online booking system for all health authorities, and it's also that this shouldn't have come as a surprise. CBC was asking the Ministry of Health last week about the contracts to see the call centers, and those calls were ignored. So, I mean, even if the government didn't know there was a problem, they should have at least known that there'd be interest in this. And, for them to be caught flat-footed was kind of inexplicable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Justin McElroy from the CBC was trying to get a hold of those details. I mean, he entered into the black void of nothingness that is trying to get any information out of the BC government these days on the pandemic or what it's doing. It just kind of just disappears. But Katy, what were your thoughts on watching this play out this week?
Well, now you and Maclean took my talking point.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us this week on the show. Yeah. We're going to wrap up early.
We all wanted to talk about Justin McElroy because I found that the most compelling piece.
Yes, Justin's so great. Justin with his numbers and his charts. Everyone loves Justin. Okay, we get it.
But I think overall this speaks to the critical importance of having all of your logistics covered before you make a significant communications announcement with province-wide implications. So for me, it's, pro tip. when the government refuses to answer very basic, pertinent, apolitical questions about a massive operations rollout, and instead offers banal platitudes such as "we have it handled," that is a massive, massive red flag that something's not right here. So I think the opposition was really correct in asking to see the details of that Telus contract and inquiring why the government didn't have not only a backup plan, but a series of backup plans given the significance of this file.
Is there, and this is a totally selfish question, but is there any way to break through the banal platitudes when government doesn't want it? Like, it's, as journalists, we get stuck trying to form the greatest, craft the most meticulous question, like some sort of Harry Potter wizard spell, that if only we just had the right words in the right order, we could reach the truth. And is there any way to do that when you get like a week like this week where you just want to know what's in the Telus contract, and how you ask maybe doesn't take you anywhere? Just back to you, Katy.
Well, I would say, yeah, the more specific a question that a journalist asks, sometimes the more difficult it is for government to answer. So if you can broaden your question as much as possible while really grasping onto the pertinent details that you need for your story, that might yield a better response. And for example, like I think Justin was also asking for a tour of the centers. I think on that, the government had a point to say no, just given that we're still in the middle of a pandemic, it might not be safe to allow folks into those rooms. So that kind of gave them a way out, but it's still pretty inexcusable.
Let's widen the conversation up because, and we can go around again, but just on this week of whiplash where we started with this catastrophic rollout on Monday where the system went down, the emergence on Tuesday of a cartoon villain in the name of Telus, which the health minister tore a strip off of in question period, just went after Telus. You've let British Columbians down, you've let seniors down. And then on Wednesday, the sudden and abrupt news right at 5 o'clock that things are going so well. We have turned things around so just complete 180 that we're going to move up the next cohort of individuals, 85-year-olds and older, and get them in early. And then on Thursday, we get another set of mixed messages where we have modeling that shows actually things are not that great right now in terms of infections and variants in the province, but we're going to relax spring break rules from Dr. Henry. So if you're the member of the public and you're looking this up and down, left and right kind of mixed messaging, is there anything we could take away from a week like that and what it means politically, Maclean?
There's been mixed messaging on the pandemic, and not just in BC, from day one. I mean, there's been a panic about, whether people should be allowed to go outside. And, the reason you're outside apparently is significant. If you're protesting something good, it's good. If you're protesting something bad, it's bad. The virus probably doesn't care. And so, yes, it is odd to hear in a week that the modeling predicts that there's going to be possibly a third wave and that the variants are spreading, but also we're relaxing outdoor gatherings and we're encouraging more people to get back to work. It's confusing. And if you're not following, the specific details in the daily briefings, and increasingly fewer and fewer people are, it's baffling. But I don't think this is anything new.
Yeah. No, and maybe not unique to us either. Like you mentioned, it's everyone's sort of grappling with this. Jillian, what do you make of this up and down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just speaks to how many kind of competing priorities there are. Like they're dealing with the economy, with people's mental health, all of these different things, as well as the pandemic. And, at the later stages, those things have become even more and more pressing as they sort of pile on. I think that, what the government hasn't done that they could is just be a little bit more clear and upfront with people why they're doing this. Like, don't try to act like we're loosening these social restrictions because, we're doing better. Just be frank. Like, obviously people are not following the guidelines. They're doing it behind closed doors because they don't want to be subject to scrutiny. And so this is a release valve for people to be able to have that socialization, which is important in a relatively low risk way. And I think that, if the government just spoke a little bit more frankly about that, I think that might be a little bit more effective, and people wouldn't kind of devolve into these arguments about, are we doing well, are we not doing well? Because it's not really it's a false dichotomy, I think, at this point.
Mm-hmm. Katy?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a Twitter epidemiologist, there's a lot of talk about our cases holding in the 500s and some concern around that. But we know from public health experts that really the data you want to focus on is hospitalizations and ICUs. And because those are the numbers that government focuses on, because it refers to the overall burden on the healthcare system and its capacity. We saw the numbers spike in terms of hospitalizations in January, but they've ticked down ever since. We saw a bit of a spike over the last couple of weeks, but Obviously not to the extent where it's a concern to Dr. Henry and her crew. So clearly with the modeling that we saw, there's an evidence-based rationale for loosening these restrictions, especially in areas of lower transmission like outside.
What about comm strategy? And feel free, anyone who wants to take this, to jump in here. But like, when we look at a week like this where government has a problem, creates a villain, then sort of says we're doing a lot better than we thought, and it's a big win for us, and then this kind of muddled sort of end to the week. Is there any comms strategy or any kind of public relations strategy that's in place? Anyone want to jump in there?
Well, from my perspective, like in the Premier's office, you are responsible for knowing every kind of potential announcement that could come up, and often that includes public health orders. Maybe it's a little bit flexible when it could be announced. Maybe it should be announced towards the end of the week, and you bump it up a couple of days. There is the potential of that there. So, but I think whether or not these two positive announcements this week, the relaxation of outdoor restrictions and the expedited rollout of those 85 or older, whether those were planned or not, that served as a really positive pivot for government in the media cycle. So if they coordinated that, good for them. And if not, it was a happy coincidence that helped them in the end anyway.
Yeah. Maclean, I was amused on Twitter. You were sort of talking a bit about one of the question periods. Government pivoted so hard. They went from saying, Telus needs to be held accountable, to the next day, why is everyone focused on Telus? Why are we talking about the past? Can't we focus on the future, the bright future ahead of us, rather than literally the crisis that occurred the day before, which prompted these extraordinary statements of profound disappointment from the Premier. And then the next day you say, hey, about that Telus thing, why are you asking about Telus? I found that rather amusing, but maybe that was just me.
No, I mean, it was amusing, and it's especially amusing in context of the wider BC politics, where a lot of answers to a lot of questions have to do with 16 years ago or the 90s, and so then to profess 48 hours ago is the dim ancient past that we can only peer through a glass darkly to even perceive it. I mean, it's funny. I think your reaction was the right one. All you can do is be amused.
Yeah, Jillian, what did you like? Were you impressed or disappointed, or was there anything you found in the kind of the way government handled this week that struck you?
Yeah, I think that, we've talked on this show about how the government sometimes has a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. And I think with the vaccine rollout, they did the right thing, which was underpromising and overdelivering, and it allowed them to, announce that they were moving the rollout up. So yeah, I think that they're showing a little bit more thoughtfulness, a little bit less freneticness in the way that they're sort of rolling these things out. And they recognize, we saw John Horgan has the highest approval rating among premiers in the province. I think they recognize that they've got a little bit of breathing room, and that the public is in a forgiving mood. And that's allowed them to kind of, take things a little bit slower.
Yeah, for sure. He and the New Democrats have, not to use a term, but they have a lot of political capital to throw around if they want, and things, and it's a good time for them. Let's head to the next topic, which has a couple different ways into it, and is interesting to watch the Greens this week in the legislature. They brought up a couple of really fascinating issues, and the first is concerns about the NDP's firearm bill, which they brought in as an anti-gang measure. It's intended to do things like more registration at firing ranges, making it illegal to have concealed compartments in vehicles, and cracking down on the illegal transportation of firearms in vehicles. That led to Green MLA Adam Olsen bringing up a point about First Nations treaty rights to hunt in the ways that they deem acceptable, and his father going through a case in which he was arrested for transporting a firearm in a vehicle while hunting more than 20 years ago. And he brought this up in the House as a concern. He caused the public safety minister to pause a section of the bill. Jillian, let's go to you on that. That was quite a moment, I think, for Adam Olsen, and he raised some larger issues perhaps there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very rare in a majority government to see the government, stand a bill down so quickly, like in the moment that an issue with it is raised. And, kudos to Adam. He's very knowledgeable. Like you said, this is literally his life. That, his father had to fight this case all the way to the Supreme Court. It consumed their lives for like 10 or 15 years. So he knows it. But, I think it's indicative of like a broader pattern as well with the government, where they've sort of done the easy part with UNDRIP, like passing the legislation, getting the initial accolades, and we're starting to see how it's much more difficult to implement in practice. and there are no easy answers for it.
The government mentioned that they did some consultations on it, and they talked to the Assembly of First Nations, Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and the First Nations Summit. And Liberal Ellis Ross pointed out those organizations are great, but they don't hold title, and they don't count as all of consultation, which is a duty to consult by government on, especially after UNDRIP. And I think that struck me as very interesting. And I think we'll come back to it as a topic, I guess, in another podcast. But how does government consult properly is the $1 million question, which we've been wrestling with on pipelines and all sorts of big issues. And again, here on a firearms bill, Adam Olsen says that consultation wasn't done. His Sartlip Nation wasn't consulted. His father wasn't, and that, I think that's a fascinating question. And this is the latest example of that that we have to keep an eye on for sure. But I do want to also talk about the other thing that the Greens raised this week, and I'll throw this to you, Katy, on mental health. And Adam Olsen and Sonia Furstenau have really been leading that file that came up in question period. And Adam, in particular, said the stigma that still exists on getting help, especially mental health help at a healthcare facility, has not been tackled by this government or the last government, I guess, or maybe any government has really figured that out. And we should be doing more on it with this shadow pandemic of mental health. What did you make of that and the response from the minister?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think the Greens are doing a great job on this file, holding the government to account. And my other point is, like, the government's response is really starting to piss me off on this. I think Minister Malcolmson is rather quickly exposing herself as weak, unprepared, ill-informed, and quite frankly, dishonest on this file. The Greens had a legitimate question about lack of access to mental health in question period, and her response was yet again, this is not the first time she's done this, to kick it back to the previous government for not having a system in place, and then just shamelessly proceeding to take credit for a number of the initiatives that we started, like the expansion of the Foundry Centers or the establishment of the Mental Health Center at Royal Columbian. Like, these were BC Liberal initiatives. So I don't want to be rude here, but putting my nonpartisan hat on, maybe at a minimum, from a communications perspective, it might be time to refresh those talking points in the QP binder that aren't outright lies.
Jillian?
And maybe think of something that your government has done that isn't a continuation of our policies, aside from giving out free dangerous drugs. On to you, Jillian.
Okay. Yeah, take that one, Jillian.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting, and it really shows how the Greens have sort of shaken up the landscape, because, in the past, the NDP didn't really have like a progressive party that could hold them to account on issues like this. And if they were kind of, failing to deliver on issues like decriminalization or safe supply, they can just kind of revert back to saying, oh, well, we're better than the Liberals. And that kind of placates people that want to see action on those issues. But now there's another party that's very credible. Both Sonia Furstenau and Adam Olsen are very knowledgeable, very well versed on these files, and speak to them with a lot of credibility, and they make very compelling case, and they're not going to let up. And so I think the NDP has to sort of revise their playbook, like Katy said, because it's not enough to just sort of talk about the last 16 years anymore.
Yeah, it's a great point. It works when it's two parties because you just blame the other party, but that third party that comes in with a better high ground, it's a lot harder to kind of shake off a good question from them with a standard kind of smear attack response to your enemies who aren't even asking the question. So yeah, we'll keep talking about that for sure. I want to get to hot take here. This week's hot take is a federal issue. We are now 2 years without a federal budget, and speculation is just at a fever pitch that we are about to have an election. That's possibly one of the reasons why we have no budget. So I want to go around the table, Price is Right style. You get to pick when you think an election is going to be, but if you go over, that's how Price is Right works, right? Is this Wheel of Fortune? I'm going to spin a giant wheel, and then you pick the spot on the wheel. No, that's the wrong one. Okay, so you got to pick the date for the federal election. If you don't think we're having one, then I guess you go with none, but I think we're going to have one. Anyway, let's go around. Katy.
We are absolutely having a federal election this year. My guess is budget mid-April, and the election by June 12th.
Jillian?
I'm going to say October 15th.
Okay, for the budget or for the election?
For the election.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Maclean?
Oh, in the spirit of Price is Right rules, I'm going to say October 14th.
Oh, so you did the -1. You did
I did.
you tried to
Shameless.
undercut. You know, people who
Shameless.
win that way don't really win, Maclean. That's all I'm saying.
they?
Those are the cheaters. Those are the cheaters. You know Ken Jennings. Is that the wrong show again? I think that's probably
I think it might be.
It is the wrong show.
My crown will rest heavily on my head, but it will rest there.
The riches that you won for the prizes we didn't mention exist at the beginning of the contests we just had. So, yeah, I mean, it looks like it. It's a long time without a federal budget. It's hard to sort of... We're wrestling with budgetary limitations here in British Columbia, and, you know, stay with us because we're going to talk a bit about that on the audio podcast, the idea that we don't have a provincial budget here and what does it mean, and the delays and all of that. But federally, boy, is that a long time. And you kind of think that maybe that is an indication that they want to use it as a springboard. Here's our plan. Here we go. Boom, out to the voters in the spring or the summer, the early fall. But we will see. Thanks so much for watching. If you're watching us this week on the YouTubes and the such, soon to be on Czech Television. We'll let you know when we're about to debut on TV as well. And again, make sure you subscribe to get the podcast in your inbox on Fridays or to your face, depending on how you subscribe. And we'll be back with some more BC politics for you next week.
More episodes of Political Capital are available at checknews.ca/podcasts or search Political Capital wherever you listen to podcasts.